Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and in popular culture. Oh, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Bruce Markusen, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how you doing?
I'm doing really great, Bruce. Definitely looking forward to tonight. How's everything with you?
Very good. I notice you're in a different location again.
Yes, it's the library.
Yeah. Okay.
It should remind you of the Clue game.
I see. Yeah. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see our backgrounds. And what's going on with the other room? Is that under construction or something?
Yes, it is. Maybe it will be the graveyard next time.
Okay.
I'm still doing some construction plans. So you just never know. Keep your eyes open.
Yeah. That's a great backdrop. I love it. I need to get something like that. Well, we're glad to have you as always. We're glad to also have an opportunity to talk about a really fun and important event that's coming up. Because on this week's episode, we are going to preview Serling Fest 2025, which takes place in Binghamton, New York on September 19th, 20th, and 21st. Now, as a lot of you know, I'm in Cooperstown. That's where I live. And Binghamton's only about an hour and 20-minute drive, so it's really not that far away from me. And certainly if you live in New York State or the tri-state region down near the city, this is not too far away. It's an event I've been to a couple of times before, really enjoy it. With us to discuss this year's Serling Fest and also examine the career and the life of the great Rod Serling are Mark Olshaker. Mark, a personal friend of Serling's, one of the creative forces also behind the Netflix series called Mindhunter. And also with us as well for the first time is Nick Parisi. Nick is the president of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation and the author of just a phenomenal book that I'm holding in my hand right now, showing it for those of you on YouTube. It's called Rod Serling, His Life, Work, and Imagination. It is over 500 pages, including index and footnotes, just a tremendous resource that examines not just the Twilight Zone and not just Night Gallery, but really all the writings of Rod Serling, many of which have become forgotten over time. And we are kind of reminded by what a prolific and outstanding writer, creative force Rod Serling was by Nick Parisi in this book. So we're very glad to have both Mark and Nick. Welcome, both of you gentlemen. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Tracy. And I'm going to let Nick describe Serling Fest, but I'll say that our theme this year is Rod Serling in his own words. We've collected a whole archive, if you will, a catalog of things he said. And as Nick is about to tell you, they couldn't be more relevant today than they were 50 years ago and more when he wrote them or said them.
We're going to talk a lot about Serling Fest, give people a full preview, tell them how they can get tickets and that sort of thing. Let me start with you, Nick. When did you first become interested in Rod Serling? Because we know Mark knew him personally, became good friends with him.
I'm very jealous.
What about you? Well, you're a little bit younger, right?
Yes.
Slightly younger. Yeah. How did you first become interested in the work of Rod Serling and what he did during his all too short life?
Well, like so many other people, it was the Twilight Zone that drew me in. I became a fan of the Twilight Zone, obviously not in its original run, but in its syndication. I started watching it when I was maybe 10 years old, right around 1980. So that'll give you my age. And the show just hypnotized me from the first time I saw it. There was nothing like it on TV. There certainly wasn't anything else like it on TV when it first aired, 59 to 64. But even when I was watching it in the late 70s, it was a different beast. It was a different thing. And not only the show, but Rod Serling. Rod Serling drew me in, his persona and his language, his use of language. Even when I was a kid, I think I recognized that, these characters and this guy, he just talks in a different way than they do on Gilligan's Island. I mean, it's a different it's a different thing. And I didn't know the word for it, but it was literate. It was literary, and it was literate. And I became a fan of the show right about then. And what I tell people very often is that, some people may not realize if they didn't live through this particular time, but the 1980s were a huge time for the Twilight Zone. I mean, in the 1980s, you had, the Twilight Zone magazine was being published at the time. You had Mark Zicree published his Twilight Zone Companion, which was a revolutionary book that came out in 1981. Then you had the Twilight Zone feature film in 1983. You had the first Twilight Zone reboot in 1985. So from 1980 to 1986 was really a golden era for Twilight Zone fans. We were inundated with lots of it. And that's when I became a real fanatic for the Twilight Zone. And just gradually over time, I became aware of all the other things that Rod Serling wrote, and I kind of became obsessive about finding out about all of those things.
Let me go back a generation from Nick, because I'm sort of half a generation ahead of him, and I am part of that 60s generation, the generation that I have characterized as believing was idealistic enough to believe that anything was possible and cynical enough to believe that nothing was true. And I believe that a lot of that sensibility obviously came from the Vietnam War, from the Civil Rights Movement, from the women's liberation movement. But I think a lot of that sensibility and perspective, just as Nick has talked about in the 1970s and 80s, came from the Twilight Zone and shows like that showed us what human nature really could be like under stress. I mean, you have shows like The Monsters on Maple Street, which showed how a ordinary neighborhood can become a mob very easily. You had Death's Head Revisited, about that takes place coming back to a Nazi concentration camp. I mean, Nick and several others of our members who've written books about the Twilight Zone and Rod Serling can give you chapter and verse. But I would really make the case that Rod was very instrumental in shaping the sensibilities of my generation going forward. And I think not only me, but I think that's a value set that a lot of us have going forward, which is why, and Nick has just written another book about this, Rod is at least as relevant today as he was 60 years ago.
Mark, you knew him. He
Yep.
kind of befriended you.
Yep.
In a way, took you under his wing.
Yep.
Tell us what kind of guy he was.
Well, first of all, he wasn't this stiff, kind of staccato speaking person that you saw on television. He was tremendously friendly. He was very funny. He had a tremendous sense of humor, and he was incredibly generous. I mean, I knew him for 10 years, the last 10 years of his life, roughly from 1965 to 1975, which, again, if you do the math, means I knew him from the time I was 14 till the time I was 24. And I met him originally at a conference in Washington of the American Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, of which he was at the time the president. And I sort of timidly went up to the front table with my paperback copy of Stories from the Twilight Zone and asked him to sign it. And he immediately engaged me in conversation. And from that point on, we kind of hit it off. And for some reason, I don't know if he saw something in me or he just became my friend and mentor. I mean, he would write me letters and call me old friend, even though I was probably 18 at the time and things like that. And I don't think, I've been a professional writer now for a long time. I just published my 19th book, and I don't know how many film projects I've got in the can, as well as journalism. And I have to say, Rod was the primary influence on me. And I think in terms of my sensibility and my approach to literature, to journalism, to documentary film work, it's still there, as you and I talked about on a previous broadcast, Bruce.
Yeah. Nick, you not old enough really to have gotten the chance to meet Rod Serling. Neither Tracy or I had that opportunity either.
But I have to say, to interrupt, that Nick
Yeah.
has been one of the people who's really carried on the legacy.
Oh, yeah.
And those of us of my generation are very appreciative and grateful for that.
I believe you knew his widow quite well, and you certainly have a good friendship with the daughter, Anne.
Yes, I certainly knew Carol. I know Jody, and Anne is one of my closest friends. And, I think she is just as committed to maintaining his legacy as we are, if not more so, obviously. She was 20 years old when he died. And that was a tremendous blow to her. They were essentially best friends. I mean, they were, I don't know what else to say, but I mean, it was a tremendous trauma for all of us. I mean, he died when he was 50 years old. And as you pointed out, in his all too short life. And when you think about it, he was a comet. I mean, his entire professional career was only 25 years. I mean, that's pretty staggering when Nick can enumerate all of his great work, not only Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, but also all of the television plays, all of which Nick has either read or seen from the golden age of TV drama.
It is amazing.
Nick, you've gotten a chance to really know the family well. Tell us about what the Serlings mean to you.
Well, I know both of his daughters, as Mark mentioned, Anne and Jody. Anne was kind enough to write the foreword for my book, so I've become very friendly with her and her husband Doug, and know Jody very well as well. I never did get to meet Carol. I sent her a copy of the book when it was maybe the day it was published, and she sent me a very, very nice letter almost immediately after she got it. Said how grateful she was for it, and thanked me for writing it. So I treasure that letter. But Anne has been a close friend, and as Mark said, I think she's just as dedicated to promoting and preserving her father's legacy as the rest of us in the foundation are as fans. And she wrote, it should be said, she wrote a beautiful, terrific book, memoir called "As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling." That was really, to me, it was like the missing piece of the Rod Serling puzzle for me. It was the book that after I read that, I said, okay, now I feel like now I know the guy. Now, even after all the research I had done and watching everything he ever wrote, now I got that last piece. Now I feel like I know him as a human being even more than I already did. So I can't praise Anne's book enough.
And here's a personal story which will support what Nick just said. I knew an economist in Washington named Monroe Newman. We called him Mike, and Mike happened to go to Antioch College with both Rod and Carol. And he told me a story. And when Anne came down to Washington to visit me, I got her together with Mike, and Mike told her this story, that in Antioch at the time, there were two barber shops. It was a small town, but two barber shops. One would only cut white people's hair. The other would cut anybody's hair. Rod, who was an undergraduate at the time, organized the entire college, the entire Antioch College, to boycott the establishment that refused to cut black people's hair, and made everybody go to the other one. And this is just one example, an early one, of how he felt about prejudice, which I think, as Nick can probably confirm, he thought was the greatest evil of our time, discrimination against anybody. And he had said at one point, when you invite prejudice out to joust with it and see it in all its ugly forms, it can't hide anymore.
I want to go back to something Nick said a moment ago, the book that he referred to, Anne Serling's book, which I've read as well. It's outstanding. She's such a terrific writer. I wish she would write more. I think
we do too.
Yeah,
we've been encouraging her. And she's also, for both the Twilight Zone magazine and a couple of other publications, she actually took several of Rod's scripts and wrote them in narrative form, and they're quite good.
We're going to get to Serling Fest in a moment, but one more question to lead in, and it's for Mark. Rod has been gone for 50 years now.
Right.
But if anything, he is more popular today than when he was alive. If I can compare him to someone from my other world, the baseball world, he's sort of like Roberto Clemente, who was a great player, Hall of Fame player, pretty popular toward the end of his career. But I would argue that he is more beloved now, more than 50 years after he died in a plane crash. And I kind of feel the same way about Rod Serling, in that he had a degree of popularity back then, but now he is even more well remembered. He's even more legendary. I think he's more beloved by so many fans.
I think you're absolutely right, Bruce. And in fact, I remember hearing, you probably know where it comes from. I don't. Somebody said there have been many stars in baseball, but only two genuine heroes, Jackie Robinson and Roberto Clemente. And they both reached this apotheosis because of what they did and what they represented. And I think Rod was the same way. I can tell you, having known him, that he would be absolutely gobsmacked, shocked to see the response, to see the books written about him. I was the first one who actually tried to write a book about him in my early 20s, and got him, and he agreed to completely participate and give me anything I wanted, submit to interviews. But he said at the same time, I fear that you won't get a publisher because I don't think I've done enough for anybody to find me interesting and interesting enough for a book. And unfortunately, that was the case. So I think he would be absolutely staggered to see Anne's book published and do well, to see Nick's book published, to see Mark Dawidziak, who wrote Everything I Learned, Everything I Know I Learned in the Twilight Zone, among many others. Mark Zickry's book, The Twilight Zone Companion, which is now in its third edition and God knows how many printings. So Rod would be absolutely staggered by that. The other thing he would be staggered about, and I think the thing that would give him the most joy, is that in the Binghamton school system, the fifth graders do a unit every spring where they learn about morality, about society, about socioeconomic issues, all of that through watching Twilight Zone episodes, talking about them, and then doing creative projects based on them. I've spoken before the group, Anne has, I think Nick has. So I think of all of the tributes that Rod has, including the statue that our foundation put up in Binghamton, I think this fifth grade unit would probably give him the most satisfaction that his work has lived. I mean, his work has now lived longer than he has, because as of last year, he had been dead as long as he was alive.
How is it that he's more popular now? Is it just the Twilight Zone? Is it the collective morality, philosophy that he had? What do you attest this to,
Nick?
Well, it is. It's what he put into the Twilight Zone. I say this all the time, is that if the Twilight Zone were just a series about monsters and spaceships and twist endings, even if the Twilight Zone were these fantastic, ironic twist endings that people would remember, that would be great. But we wouldn't be talking about it 65 years later. We're talking about it now because of the messages that Rod Serling imbued the series with. We're talking about it because of the philosophy that Rod Serling espoused in his work. And Rod Serling did that in everything that he wrote, not just the Twilight Zone, but before the Twilight Zone and after the Twilight Zone. And it was something that he just believed that was part of the writer's job. It was his duty to make some kind of a point in the story that he was telling. Otherwise, he didn't think there was a point to it. There was any reason to write it. You had to have some kind of a point. And he's been criticized a little bit over the years for sometimes making that point a little too bluntly. But that's a criticism I think he would take, because he just, he believed that it was his job to make that point, whatever it may be. And Rod was very egalitarian in it. He would think, if you want to make the opposite point, go right ahead, make your own show, and you do it from the opposite point of view, because that's what it's supposed to be. The best response to a film that you disagree with is to make your own film, and he believed that. And so so we're talking about Rod Serling all these years later because he stands. I mean, listen, Mark mentioned that good quote about Jackie Robinson and Roberto Clemente being heroes. You know, one of our board members that Mark mentioned, Mark Dawidziak, he mentions that Rod Serling was the first writer he ever saw as a hero, and he's a hero. He's my hero for certain, and he wouldn't be my hero if he was just a creative, clever writer. He's my hero because he was outspoken, and because he used his platform to talk about the things that were important to him. And that's why we're talking about him.
And I would also mention that I happen to believe, and to a certain extent know, that had he lived, he probably would have continued to be engaged in television to a certain extent, and certainly movie script. But he really wanted to get into narrative writing, into writing, to try his hand at novel writing and theater. And so he, interestingly, he showed me a manuscript back in 1973, I think, 2 years before he died, and it was pretty well complete. And no one's ever found that manuscript.
I did, Mark.
You did?
I did. It exists. Yep. Yeah.
Congratulations. Well,
we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it off the air.
For a while, I thought it was my imagination.
Nah, yep.
But I actually saw it stacked in his office.
It's in Ithaca. It's at the Ithaca College archive.
Right. Well, but I think, he really wanted to expand into other fields. And I think particularly theater, had he lived, I think he really could have been a tremendous influence on the theater. Unfortunately, so many of our great theatrical practitioners like Lorraine Hansberry died young, but I think Rod really could have made an impact there.
Oh, nice. Oh, he sounds like such an amazing human being.
And incredibly generous, great sense of humor. I was a nobody at that point, and the fact that he was willing to treat me almost as an equal, as much as the difference in our ages allowed.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. So let's talk a little bit about Serling Fest. For our listeners, including myself, although I won't be attending, but some of our
We
listeners...
do have people coming from Canada, by the way.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So anybody who's going for the very first time, can you maybe tell us a little bit about what makes this event a little more unique compared to some of the other like pop culture events?
Sure. Well, the first thing I tell people is when they come is not to expect Comic-Con. I mean, it's not Comic. It's not. There's not going to be 10,000 people there, or 50,000 people there, or maybe even 1,000 people there. But it's a much more intimate event. We don't have a costume contest. We don't have people dressed up in Twilight Zone garb, and it's really it is a tribute. It's a 3-day tribute to Rod Serling, and we do make it fun. I don't want to make it sound like it's dry. But generally speaking, the Friday night we do screenings. So we're going to be screening a few different things that Rod wrote, including the Twilight Zone episode on Thursday.
With introductions by people who know what they're talking about.
With introductions by, so this year we have a bunch of first-time guests, which we're very excited about. Mm-hmm. Joe Dougherty will be with us. He's an Emmy Award-winning television writer, wrote for 30-something, Pretty Little Liars, and he just published a book called Rod Serling at 100, One Writer's Acknowledgement. So he's a Serling aficionado, to say the least. And he'll be introducing the Twilight Zone episode that we're screening. Frank Spotnitz, producer of The X-Files and The Man in the High Castle. And if there was ever a Twilight Zone-inspired series, it's The X-Files. So Frank will be with us, and he'll be introducing an X-Files episode that was very much explicitly inspired by the Twilight Zone. And so we have those types of things on the Friday night. And then on Saturday, we have an authors roundtable with all of our authors asking, an interview and audience questions. You can ask them anything you'd like to know about their work. We have trivia, we have readings from Anne Serling. So it's all sorts of different events, and it's all day from 10 a.m. till 10 o'clock p.m. And then on Sunday, we'll be at Recreation Park in Binghamton, which is the home of the Rod Serling statue. And the plan this year is to read some of Rod's speeches, some of his, at least passages from his speeches outside in the park from members of our board. And just kind of get together. It's a little more casual on the Sunday, and the Sunday event is free. So we sell tickets for the Friday and Saturday, but the Sunday event in the park is free. And we're ending it with a band this year. We'll have a band in the bandstand at Recreation Park. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and it always is.
And Nick, you might mention that Recreation Park, where the statue was, where the carousel now is, was a place that Rod played himself almost every day as a child.
Yeah, Recreation Park is it's about 7 blocks from where Rod grew up. Rod grew up at 67 Bennett Avenue, which in Binghamton, and Recreation Park is the park that he grew up in. It's the park that inspired the Twilight Zone episode Walking Distance, about the desire to try to go back to your childhood and relive those idyllic days of being in the park and playing baseball and going on the carousel. So that's where the statue had to be. So that's where we put it. And it already was the home of the carousel that inspired Walking Distance. And the carousel already has Twilight Zone artwork all the way around the carousel. And in the bandstand, there's a marker that says Rod Serling Twilight Zone Walking Distance, just to acknowledge that this park was the inspiration for that particular episode, which happens to be probably my favorite episode of the Twilight Zone. So it all came together there. It's Recreation Park is Twilight Zone Mecca. It's if you want to make the pilgrimage to find where Rod Serling, where those ideas came from, you stand in the middle of Recreation Park and you can feel those vibes. At least I do.
And going back to Walking Distance, one of the great episodes that Nick mentioned, Rod had a summer home, a cabin actually, on Lake Cayuga up in Ithaca, maybe 40 minutes or an hour away. And every summer he would, by himself, not with the family, by himself, he would drive down to Binghamton and just walk through and relive his haunts. So this was very important to him.
Oh my gosh. It sounds like it's going to be a fantastic event. Absolutely fantastic. So, Nick, why don't we just start with you? What is one moment from a past event that really stands out for you?
In my own life?
Oh, well, I was going to refer to Serling Fest, but in your own life.
You said a past moment, so I got confused there for a second.
You can choose.
Yeah. Well, as far as I mentioned Mark Zickry's Twilight Zone Companion earlier, and I should mention again, because I really don't think that my book would exist without Mark's work. The Twilight Zone Companion was just a revolutionary book in a lot of ways. It really was the first book to take that kind of a deep dive. I don't even know if the term deep dive existed before the Twilight Zone Companion. And so to become friends with Mark Zickry, he was at one of our Serling Fests a couple of years ago, and to become friendly with him has been a highlight for me. Because if you told that 12-year-old kid who was reading the Twilight Zone Companion compulsively, I read that book until it's shredded. It's in pieces right now. That I would know the writer and be friendly with them. That's pretty cool. So I think I'd have to go with that.
Oh, awesome. Mark, how about you?
Well, I think I can't speak to one moment, but just having Anne and Jody and some of Rod's students and people who actually knew him come and testify and give evidence, if you will, about what kind of man he was. And I'm just pleased to say that everything that I knew, everything that I sensed about him has been validated by all of these other people who came. And going back to Mark Zickry and the Twilight Zone Companion, as I mentioned, our theme this year is Rod Serling in his own words. And one of the things that Mark does in his book is he gives the opening monologues and closing passages from each of the Twilight Zone episodes. So you really can get that idea of the way he thought, the way he talked, as Nick was talking about. Just his whole personality really did come out in these openings and closings. In fact, I wrote a book several years ago called The Killer's Shadow, which was about Joseph Paul Franklin, probably our first known racist serial killer. You might remember him as the one who shot Larry Flint, and I'm blanking on the others. But in any event, and killed a number of Black people, interracial couples, and Jewish leaders. And and as the opening, as the epigraph and the closing of my book, The Killer's Shadow, I used Rod's opening and closing from He's Alive, which starred Dennis
Hopper.
Hopper as a sort of young neo-Nazi who is inspired by this shadowy figure who turns out to be the ghost of Adolf Hitler. And so I think one of the things that the points that Nick has made over and over again, and it needs to be made over and over again, that all of this is still alive. And the reason that Rod is still alive to all of us is because he speaks to the moment. And there is not, I would say there's not a moment in the last 60 years that he hasn't spoken to. In fact, the presentation that I'm going to give at Serling Fest this year is I'm going to play a recording of a speech Rod gave at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. In 1968, of which I attended and spent some time with Rod then. And when you hear this speech, as Nick heard it last week, when I sent it to him, it's at least as relevant today as it was then. I mean, we'll have to explain some of the topical references, but thematically, it could not be more on point. Don't you agree, Nick?
Completely. It really is almost it's almost unfathomable how prescient and how on point Rod Serling's words are from how long ago. He speaks to our moment constantly. I'm continuously amazed at how I find a Rod Serling quote that speaks directly to what we're dealing with today in this country. It's because Rod was socially engaged, he was socially aware. And again, he believed in addressing these things. He didn't think that his opinion was his to keep to himself. He thought it was his duty to speak his opinion if he believed in it, and if he was confident enough in his opinion to speak it out. And he did it. And he's still speaking to our current predicament.
And again, with the Congress, which is essentially a rubber stamp to our current president, Rod gave a speech, a graduation speech, where he essentially said, everybody has their own opinion. You do what you need to do, but there are certain lines that you do not cross, and when you get to them. Nick may be able to give us the exact quote, but basically it's this: from this point forward, I do not go any further. And Rod was like that. I mean, when he was serious about something, one of his social values, he did not cross that line. And in fact, I think it was last year, Ann Serling, Mark Dawidziak, and I did a presentation on Rod's values, and that's all we talked about. And I think you get a tremendous sense of the man just from the things he believed in and the things he did, and the things he did.
Mark, what was the year he spoke in front of Congress? Or
Library of Congress, I believe it was 1968. So, all hell was breaking loose at that point. And he was completely open about everything that was going on. And what he was talking about was the responsibility of the writer to deal with these issues. And and he said, he warned, and again, couldn't be more prescient. He said, what begins with a blue pencil very often ends in a concentration camp. And the minute you stifle the writer, for whatever reason, so begins a decay in the body politic that often leads to disaster. And he said, but as long as the writer remains free to speak to what his mood dictates, his conscience indicates, cause cries out for, that's all of the freedom, all of the other freedoms, all of them will remain intact. And he said, and I've said this so many times, I can probably say it by heart, and it is then that writing becomes a weapon of truth, an act of conscience, and an article of faith.
Yeah. So when he spoke to the Library of Congress, Martin Luther King had just been assassinated, correct?
That's right. And Bobby Kennedy too, I guess, at that point.
And there was a pretty massive march on Washington that very day against the Vietnam War.
Right.
The Rankin marchers, the Jeanette Rankin marchers, at least 5,000 people marched against the Vietnam War. And Rod was against the Vietnam War. He spoke out against the Vietnam War. I talk about this in my book that I think one of the
remember he was a
World War II veteran,
a wounded combat veteran in the South Pacific during World War II, who enlisted right out of college. So he put his money where his mouth was.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the, I think, really admirable things about, again, one of the 100 admirable things about Rod Serling, is that if you look at his speeches, he was not a knee-jerk opposer in opposition to the Vietnam War. When we first went in, he considered it. He gave it a lot of thought and consideration. His early speeches about the war were basically saying, I don't know what we're doing there, but I'm not sure how we get out, the exit strategy, all that. He was very thoughtful about it. He was not, and then eventually he got to the point where he said, we need to be out by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, however we do it. So it was an evolution, and I think that just speaks to the way that he was considerate about these things. He was not just emotional about these issues.
And at this point, 1968, he was campaigning for Eugene McCarthy.
By 1968, forget it. Yeah, he was completely against the war by that point and campaigning for Eugene. Right.
Mark mentioned a few minutes ago, the theme for this year's Serling Fest is in his own words. So I did a little bit of research. I pulled out what I think are some important quotes from Rod Serling. Hopefully they're accurate. I want to get your perspectives on what he meant with each one of these quotations. So the first one I found, and I'd never read this before. So Rod Serling quoted as saying, if you want to prove that God is not dead, first prove that man is alive. What do you think he meant by that? I'll start with Nick.
Well, I'm
starting with Nick, by the way.
I'm not 100% sure if that's it is accurate, but I'm not sure if that's, he may have been quoting someone else when he said that. I'm not sure, but Rod was, he wasn't a religious man. He was a spiritual man, I think. He did believe in quote unquote God. He believed that there was a God, but he was not a religious man. And I think what he was talking about there, and I know the speech that comes from, is he was talking about our personal responsibilities. He was talking about, he was saying, if you want to prove that God is not dead, well, take action, do what needs to be done, be moral yourself, and take the moral action to do that. So, and he was about personal responsibility. He would preach that. And so that really is what he's, again, not from a religious standpoint, but from a human standpoint. I mean, Rod has been called a humanist by several people, and I think that's a pretty accurate description of Rod Serling. I think his work is very humanistic, and a part of that is believing that we as human beings have a responsibility to take action when things are not the way they should be.
And we have a responsibility to each other.
Oh, yes. Above all. Yeah.
Here's another quote. The worst aspect of our time is prejudice. In almost everything I've written, there is a thread of this. Man's seeming palpable need to dislike someone other than himself.
I think that speaks to exactly what he felt. I think it says exactly what he meant. And I would submit, Bruce, that was his most important cause. I think he thought that if prejudice somehow could be overcome or even mitigated, we'd all be a lot better off. He wrote so much about this. I mean, even in the days of the dramatic teleplays, I mean, he was so affected, so shocked by the murder of Emmett Till in, what was it, 1955, Nick? Something
August of 55, yes.
Yeah, that he wrote two teleplays. One was called Noon on Doomsday, and another was called A Town Is Turned to Dust. Both of which the network sponsors and censors basically emasculated, and he was very upset with that because, as he said at the time, he said, drama, at least on television, must walk tiptoe and in agony lest it offend some given cereal buyer in a given state below the Mason-Dixon. So, I mean, the sponsors were very aware of boycotts and that kind of thing. And so, but he was constantly trying to understand prejudice and to talk about it. And in fact, Rod was Jewish. He certainly, as Nick said, he wasn't an observant Jew, but he certainly embraced till the end of his life all of the values of the Jewish religion.
Did he experience anti-Semitism himself?
He did experience some, but interestingly enough, his first experience prejudice was he was blackballed from a Jewish fraternity in high school for dating a Gentile girl. So he saw it from both sides. And I can tell you, he wrote a very moving play called In the Presence of Mine Enemies about World War II. And he was roundly criticized for having a Nazi character who actually had a conscience. So as Nick said, Rod saw both sides. I mean, if I had to say one quality which he had in tremendous excess, it was empathy. He understood characters on both sides. I mean, you won't find many. Well, you'll find a few truly evil characters in such as Death's Head Revisited, when you had Nazi concentration camp officers, but in most cases, you really saw the rounded humanity of all the characters.
And just to get back to that prejudice, the issue of prejudice or addressing prejudice in television, I just want to give you a quick story. 3 years before Emmett Till, when Rod was in Cincinnati and he was writing for a Cincinnati series called The Storm. And The Storm was not a network show. It was a local show produced in Cincinnati, and it was seen only in the Cincinnati area. And at the time, it didn't have a sponsor. It had a sponsor, then it lost a sponsor. It didn't have a sponsor. So in April of 1952, it did not have a sponsor. And what does that mean? That means that you pretty much have carte blanche, because if you don't have to worry about offending the sponsor, you can really write what you want. And in April of 1952, Rod wrote a script called As Yet Untitled. And I talk about this in the book, which is, I believe it very well may be the very first television drama that directly addresses racism and prejudice. And it was not about black and white issue, but about an Asian American couple, a Chinese American couple. And it was based on a true story that was making very big news at the time. There was a couple in San Francisco. I'll shorten the story for you, but a couple in San Francisco bought a house. And 2 days after they bought it, they were essentially run out of town. The neighbors went to confront them and say, listen, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome here. And Rod Serling wrote a script that directly addressed it. He didn't cover his tracks. He didn't go in a roundabout way. It wasn't an allegory. He wrote this story about a town, running an Asian American family out of town. And that was aired in Cincinnati in 1952. So Rod was doing this from Jump Street. It wasn't something he came to later in his career. He believed that was part of his DNA right from the beginning.
And Nick can probably give us chapter and verse on this, but I believe there was a Twilight Zone episode called A Big Tall Wish. And I believe that Rod was the first producer to actually feature Black actors in dramatic parts on television.
Well, I think that the significant thing about Big Tall Wish, that Twilight Zone episode, is that it's essentially an all black cast. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't remember a white character in that. And the really significant thing about it was that these were parts that could very well have been white parts. They didn't have to be black actors. It was just that was Rod said, no, this is a story where I think this is the way I want to tell this story. And so I think that episode is pretty revolutionary.
And I also believe that in a later episode called In Praise of Pip, which is extremely moving, with Jack
Klugman.
Yeah. Yes.
Boy. Yeah.
It was, I believe, the first dramatic episode of any television series to actually mention and deal with the Vietnam War.
Very early on. Yeah. Yeah.
Here's another quote from Rod Serling. If you need drugs to be a good writer, you're not a good writer. What do you think of that one?
I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, Rod felt that what you wrote came, as he said, directly from the gut. You shouldn't need any enhancement. I mean, he was a social drinker, but he certainly, and unfortunately, he was a chronic smoker, but he didn't need alcohol or drugs or anything else to write. I mean, he was so intense. In fact, he was so intense that early on, he gave up the typewriter and started dictating because the ideas just came so organically from him. And one of our other members, Tony Albarella, who edited the 10-volume series of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone scripts, he actually sort of collected all of these dictabelts and studied them. And I remember one time I was in Rod's office, which was by the poolside of it, behind his house, and he played for me one of these dictabelts of a Twilight Zone episode he was working on. I think it was Twilight Zone. Maybe it was Night Gallery. I don't remember. And he's really intense. He does all the parts. He even does the punctuation. He said, blah, 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 exclamation point, and it goes on like that. So yeah, I mean, it absolutely came right from the gut.
Yeah. He was a pretty straight-laced guy.
He was pretty straight-laced in a lot of ways. He said that he was not. I asked him once. I said, Rod, all these things that happen in the Twilight Zone, do you wish they'd happen in real life? And he said, yes, but not to me. So he had a tremendous sense of humor. In fact, Anne tells the story that whenever she was in an elevator with him, he would whisper a dirty joke to her and then to see if she could stop from laughing until they got off the elevator. But he was very, very funny, and just really had in addition to his intensity, and he certainly had that, he had a very light and humorous view of much of the human condition.
I've got two more quotes here. One is on the Twilight Zone itself, and here's what he said. It's not a monster rally or a spook show. There will be nothing formulaed in it, nothing telegraphed, nothing so nostalgically familiar that an audience can join the actors in duets. The Twilight Zone is what it implies. The shadows are of the almost but not quite. The unbelievable told in terms that can be believed. So that's what he said about the Twilight Zone going in. Did he fulfill that promise?
Oh, I think in all ways, absolutely. And I think again, what's interesting about that quote is Rod did. You have to go back in time now and put yourself into television in 1959. Rod had to explain the Twilight Zone to people. He had to explain the Twilight Zone to network executives, to advertisers, to advertising agencies, and to the audience. The audience had never seen anything like the Twilight Zone before. He had to tell them this is what it is. And you read lots of quotes from him at the time or even his correspondence, where he would get letters from people just confused by the show. And he would very patiently explain, right back to him, say, listen, this is what the show's about. This is maybe what you missed, And so one of the things Rod Serling did with the Twilight Zone, which I think every other science fiction show since then owes a gigantic debt of gratitude to him for, is that he educated the viewing public about what science fiction and fantasy is in terms of the tropes. Rod Serling was writing these stories at a time when even the concept of time travel was foreign to most of the viewers. Most of the viewers didn't quite understand, wait, what do you mean he's now in a different time? I mean, and nowadays that sounds silly for me to even say that, but at the time that was confusing to people. In fact, we mentioned Walking Distance earlier. I can tell you two little stories about Walking Distance, and that's one is that when he first submitted the script to the producer at the time, which I think was Bill Frug. It wasn't Buck Houghton, but I think the CBS executive, I believe it was Bill Frug. And there's a point in Walking Distance where, if you haven't seen the episode, it's about a man who goes back in time to his childhood, and he meets himself as a kid. And one of the things that happens to him when he's back in time is that he causes the younger version of himself to injure himself. He hurts his leg. He's chasing him on a carousel, chasing his younger self on a carousel. He falls off and hurts his leg. But what happens in the story is when now the older version of this character comes back to the present, he's now walking with a limp that he didn't have at the beginning of the show. And Bill Frug said, "Bull, Rod, who's gonna believe that?" And Rod Serling had to say to him, "Listen, just trust me on this. This is what the Twilight Zone is. People will get it. Maybe they won't get it right away, but they will get it." So he had to be patient with the audience to understand these things, time travel and alternate dimensions and doppelgangers, and these things that we take for granted now on television were totally alien to most of the audience at the time.
Yeah, and just two things I would add to that. First, Twilight Zone, unlike a lot of the series, it was an anthology. It didn't have recurring characters. People had to be engaged in a new story every week and become engaged quickly. I mean, in 22 minutes of drama, they had to relate to these characters. And second of all, as Nick has pointed out in his own writing, is the vast majority of the Twilight Zone episodes were about ordinary people put into extraordinary and often very stressful situations. So that was another reason why ordinary people of any age could relate to the Twilight Zone, because they said, my God, these people who all these strange things are happening to, they're just like me.
Yeah. He was so hard on himself. I read a quote where he said something like, a third of the Twilight Zone episodes are good, a third are mediocre, and a third are bad. I mean, I think that's a little harsh.
It's a little harsh. I mean, we've all come up with lists of the ones we like the best and the ones we like the least. But I can tell you, part of Rod's charm, in a way, for those who knew him, was his incredible humility. In fact, it went overboard. He would say to me that he thought he would talk about the thin layer, the thin thread of my accomplishments, and he really felt that by the time he was in his mid to late 40s, maybe he was washed up. He wanted to see what else he could do. And of course, I never believed any of that. And but he really was hard on himself. And I think because one of this great sense of humor and this great generosity was triangulated with this real intensity. And Nick mentioned Gig Young's limp in Walking Distance. Rod had a limp from shrapnel in his leg from World War II.
Wow.
And that was exactly where it came from, too. I mean, the irony in Walking Distance is that this character goes back to his idyllic childhood and gets a limp. And in Rod's case, he went from his idyllic childhood into World War II and came back with that same limp. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I have one last quote from Rod Serling I want to get both your opinions on. So this is what he said. No audience likes a writer's opinion thrust down their gullet as simply a tract. It has to be dramatized and made acceptably palatable within a dramatic form. Let's start with Nick.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about before. That, Rod, he believed that his opinion had to be in that script. He had to make some kind of a point, but it was his goal to make it in a way that was entertaining and in a way that you didn't feel like you were getting hit over the head with a sledgehammer with the point. And so he very often would dramatize opposing sides of the same issue. I go through that in my book, talking about the way he would do that. That was his goal. That was his philosophy of writing, and he more often than not succeeded in doing that.
He didn't lecture. It was all done through character. I mean, character is the essence of the Twilight Zone and everything else he wrote.
Maybe at the end of the program, he might not lecture, but give a little bit of a synopsis, which sort of gave you a sense of what his opinion was.
Mm-hmm.
But the body of the show, that was definitely done through characters and stories.
Yeah, I think Bruce,
this is something Nick emphasized in his book. This guy wanted to tell you a story every day of his life. He loved storytelling. Yeah,
I think the endings often sort of emphasized the irony of the situation.
Yeah.
And that was his opportunity. The closing narration was his opportunity to maybe shift, because he wasn't a character. He was your narrator. He could say whatever he wants. So he wasn't playing a character at that point. He was Rod Serling. And one of the points I make in the book is that, there's been a lot said about the way that the Twilight Zone, the way that Rod Serling was able to address some of these issues in the Twilight Zone, because it was science fiction and fantasy, it was parable, and it was allegory and all of that. And that's all true. But you get an episode like The Monsters That Do on Maple Street, and you read the closing narration in that episode, and the tools of conquest do not always come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are merely thoughts, attitudes, prejudices that come from only the minds of men. For the record, prejudices could kill, and the search for a scapegoat has a fallout all of its own for the children and the children yet unborn. And the pity of it is that these things cannot be confined to the Twilight Zone. I mean, that's as blatant social commentary as you could possibly get. And that's not a character saying it. That's Rod Serling saying it. And he was able to say it because it was on a science fiction show at 9:30 on a Friday and not on Playhouse 90 in the middle of the day. So he was able to be as blatant as he could be in that regard, because he had that was the freedom he got from.
And even though there were aliens in this show, the aliens were essentially kind of observing and manipulating.
Yes.
It was the characters, the ordinary people, the neighborhood people themselves who did what they did to themselves.
And to give you the other quote, the famous quote is that I found on the Twilight Zone that I could have a Martian say things that a Republican or a Democrat couldn't.
Absolutely.
But my point is, in that episode, there's no Martian saying tools of conquest, or I'll go through the quote again. There's no Martian saying that. That's Rod Serling saying that. So he was able to get that by even without putting it in the mouth of a Martian.
So I think, to kind of bring this all back to where we started, the tragedy of Rod's life, in a way, aside from the fact that he died so young, was he did not really appreciate the impact that he had. I mean, it's almost like, thinking Van Gogh. His work is worth billions of dollars, famous all over the world. Everybody can recognize a Van Gogh painting. And yet he died not knowing any of this. Rod died not knowing there'd be people like Nick and Mark Dawidziak and Mark Zickrey who would be writing these great tributes to him because of his lasting influence.
We've talked about some of the terrific guests who are going to be at Serling Fest this year. We've mentioned, of course, Mark Dawidziak, whom we also know is an expert on Edgar Allan Poe, but he has written books on Serling and the Twilight Zone. And as I recall, he knew Rod personally, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he didn't.
Oh, he did not. Oh, he did not.
But he is an expert. He's also an expert on Mark Twain, Charles Dickens. He's one of our Renaissance men.
Of course, Rod Serling's daughter, Anne, will be there. Jody will be there as well.
Jody will be there for part of it, yeah.
Another guest, and this is one I have not seen in previous Serling Fest, at least not that I've been to, noted television critic David Bean Cooley, who now works for NPR. What's his connection to Rod Serling?
Well, he has David Bean Cooley has a teaching career as well, and he uses Rod and the Twilight Zone in many of his lessons. And last year, when we did our statue unveiling, in Recreation Park, we gathered a lot of tributes to Rod Serling, and David was one of the ones who was kind enough to give us a tribute video to Rod. So we learned of his being a Serling aficionado from that, really. And so he's gonna talk about what it's like to use Rod Serling in the classroom.
Wow, I had no idea that he had that background.
Yeah.
Have you met David before?
I have not, actually. No, he's closest to Mark Dawidziak, actually. And it's funny, we mentioned Mark. Mark Dawidziak is a Twain expert as well. I went to see Mark perform as Mark Twain. He does performances as Mark Twain. And David was there, and I didn't know it. Nobody introduced me to him. So I was there when I went to see him. So maybe the first time meeting him.
Mark makes a point that Rod Serling and Mark Twain were a lot alike in the terms of the social commentary, the national conscience that they presented to the nation. And I think he makes a very good point, and I'm sure he'll do that again this year.
Guys, one of the things I really like about Serling Fest is the emphasis that you have on authors and books. People are available to sign their books. You go to some of these larger comic conventions, horror conventions. Some of them have books, but some of them, it's all memorabilia. It's all signing. It's taking photographs with celebrities, actors, actresses. but there is a real literary emphasis at Serling Fest. And that's one of the things I really appreciate. Talk a little bit about that, if you would, Nick, why you feel that's such an important thing to be emphasized with this.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, that is something we've consciously done. I mean, one of it, to be real honest, is a part of necessity because the Twilight Zone was so long ago that there are relatively few name people who were actors on the Twilight Zone who are still with us. We did have Bill Mumy join us by satellite or by Zoom.
Child at the time
for a Zoom call, and he was a child actor at the time, of course, so he's still with us, thankfully. So it's there are relatively few who we could have, but we really do prefer to have a focus on the written word and showing people what Rod Serling wrote, and what we have written in tribute to Rod Serling. So yeah, that is the focus of Olshaker Fest. And again, this year we're still calling it in his own words. So we're going to be showing some very either rarely or never before heard or seen speeches and interviews with Rod that I'm very excited to show people because there's really some really fantastic stuff.
And from the beginning of Serling Fest, we've tried to keep it intimate enough that if you come, there's nobody, presenter, celebrity, author, there's nobody you can't come and talk to and spend as much time as you want with. This is not, keep the celebrities away. You don't have to buy tickets. You have to buy tickets to come, but you don't have to buy tickets to meet anybody. This is everybody's in it together.
Right.
Oh, wow. Is there any kind of way fans of Serling, like if they can't attend the festival, is there a way that they can still feel a part of this celebration? Are you going to be like hosting recordings or streaming events or anything like that?
The first thing they should do, Tracy, is go to rodserling.com, which is our website, and they can learn all things Serling at that point.
And we are working on potentially live streaming at least some of the events. We always try to record as much as possible and then try to make them available afterwards. So that will you'll almost certainly be able to get parts of it afterward. But we're seeing about ways to live stream certain parts of it. So we'll see. That's kind of to be seen. We'll wait and see.
Tracy, anybody who wants to be a part of this can join go to rodserling.com and join the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation. The dues are only $35 a year.
25.
All kinds of benefits. And we welcome anybody who's interested.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing it for us.
Yeah.
Now, for those who do want to go and have the opportunity to go to Binghamton that weekend, what's the best way for them to get tickets ahead of time?
rodserling.com is the way to go. If you go to rodserling.com, you'll see the link right there for tickets. You can either buy a weekend pass. It's $40 for the weekend or $20 per day, the Friday or Saturday. So you can get single day tickets either day. Or as I mentioned earlier, if you can't make it on Friday and Saturday and you want to join us on Sunday, Sunday is completely free. We'll be in Recreation Park, which is the main part of Serling Fest is at the Forum Theater, the Broome County Forum Theater. And I should mention it's a historic theater. It's a beautiful theater. I think it's something like 1,200 seats or something like that. And so that's where we'll be on Friday and Saturday. But
and in the lobby, Nick, is also a permanent exhibition of Rod's work.
Yeah, the Memorial Foundation put together an exhibit of Rod Serling's work, pictures and news clippings and things like that. That's permanently in place in the Forum Theater lobby. And then Sundays at Rec Park, which is maybe a mile away, something like that, about a mile away. So you can join us on Sunday morning. We'll be there pretty much all day.
So only $20 per day, very inexpensive. rodserling.com is the place to go. What time do the films start on Friday?
6 p.m. on Friday night.
And then on Saturday, 10 a.m.?
10 a.m. Saturday, and we're going till at least 8 p.m. I think more closer to 10 p.m. actually.
I've been to a couple. It's an absolute bargain. I think you should raise your prices. Not this year, but maybe in 5 years. It's a great deal. And if you want to spend money to get memorabilia, last year I actually got a wonderful graphic novel on Bela Lugosi.
Huh.
Nothing to do directly with Rod Serling, but I had a lot of fun reading that, and it was beautifully done by the artist. There were Night Gallery authors, there are Twilight Zone authors. So a lot of it does have connections to Rod Serling, but some of it, delves into maybe other areas of the horror and sci-fi worlds. So you don't have to spend too much on your tickets, which gives you a lot more money to spend in the vendor's room, which I think is terrific. I think
That's the idea. Yeah.
yeah. Couple more questions before I let you go. Thoughts on the Serling statue that opened up last year? I didn't really have a chance to find out from either of you what you thought of it. Looks beautiful to me, the way it's presented with sort of a door in the background. Very cool. But I want to get both your thoughts on what you thought of the statue when you first saw it. Let's begin with Nick.
Well, this was our project. The Memorial Foundation. We're responsible for it, so we're thrilled with it. This was something that the foundation has wanted to do for a really long time. It's always been on our wish list, and it was always kind of put on the back burner. And frankly, we weren't sure if we could afford it. It was always always an economic question. And finally, we put together a Kickstarter that funded about a third of the cost. And then we got a nice grant. Our local assemblywoman, Donna Lapardo, was able to get us a nice grant from New York State towards it. And then the foundation funded the rest of it. So we unveiled it last year. I'm thrilled with it. I just saw it again this past weekend. I was up in Binghamton and Rec Park. And I walk into Rec Park, I smile the moment I see it. I'm still thrilled with it, and we're still getting the reaction to it truly has been phenomenal. Everybody loves it. Everybody loves the statue. We are getting nothing but rave reviews for it. It's the statue, and then the base of it has a quote from Rod. Everyone has to have a hometown, Binghamton's mine, which is part of a much longer tribute to Binghamton that Rod had written in the local paper. And surrounding the statue are bricks that people bought through the Kickstarter with little messages that they were able to personalize to include in the area around the statue. So I'm still very, very proud of what we were able to accomplish with that statue, and it's beautiful.
One thing we had to, once we realized the statue could become a reality, one thing we had to do was figure out, okay, which Rod are we going to portray? Are we going to do, when he's sort of in the 70s, when he's got long hair and bushy sideburns and all of that? And when we just talked to Ann Serling and decided ultimately, no, we're going to portray him as he looked during the Twilight Zone. And we even had him with his hands clasped together, as he often did in his opening monologues. So that's the Rod that we captured. And I think we've gotten very good reaction from it.
Yeah, I think it's a great choice. He was always impeccably dressed. Mm-hmm. That tie was never an inch off kilter. I mean, he just exuded class all the time. Final question, and I've heard some talk of maybe a Serling Museum eventually being built in Binghamton. I'm curious, is that actually a possibility? And if so, is there any update on that?
There's no update on it. It is always a possibility. There was some pretty heavy discussions about it not too long ago. And I think what I can tell you is the location is part of the problem, not Binghamton particularly, but where in Binghamton.
Yeah.
So that became an issue where we could have a sufficient, because we could have a small museum for Rod Serling probably tomorrow. We could do that, but this was a multi-million-dollar project that we were talking about, and we just the location was a bugaboo for us. We couldn't quite get past it. So fingers crossed. I still think it's possible at some point in the future, but no real updates on it right now.
And the idea is, if it does come to fruition, it's a new building from the start.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being so generous with your time, giving us a really good preview of what is coming up in Binghamton later this month, Serling Fest 2025. It is taking place Friday, September 19th, Saturday, September 20th, and Sunday, September the 21st. Film festival TV episodes will be aired on the 19th. The main event is Saturday with numerous presenters, authors, roundtable discussions, and then the 21st free of charge at Recreation Park. Our thanks to Mark Olshaker and also Nick Parisi. Best of luck with this year's event. Look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for your ongoing support and interest.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Our thanks to Tracy as well. We thank all of our listeners and viewers for joining us in this museum of the macabre, as perhaps Rod Serling might have said. And we hope you'll join us again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.